Hiya, this is a video about building a cigar box guitar for my FMP over the last couple of months. I'm just going to be narrating it and giving you some more detail on it. So the first couple of images you're seeing here are the design, the cigar box, and the neck and the fretboard which were given to us. And the first issue we had was the neck was not fully completed, so we had to glue it together, as you can see in these images here. But the problem with that is we had a bit of excess glue and a bit of unevenness on the neck. So as you can see in this time lapse, what I am doing is taking a block of wood and some 120 grit sandpaper and going to town on it and making sure it's nice, even and flat. And you can see there I was using my fingers just to get a good feel of it, because sometimes it's hard to see with the eye. And this is the finished project of it. Both sides looking very nice and neat, but it didn't really matter much because you weren't going to see this. Now this next task is we had to take 5mm off the neck so it would fit into the cigar box. And as you can see, I've drawn all the lines here, and we decided that the most easy and efficient way to use it, to do it, would be using this precise saw cutter. Unfortunately, I was not allowed to use it as I'm not qualified to, so I had to get our technician Ian to. It was a lot more effective and quick, because in the other way we could have done it, we would have had to use a chisel and a hammer, which could have easily split the neck. And I felt this a lot more comfortable doing it this way. Yes. But the only issue we had is at the end of the tailstock of the neck is we needed 2mm higher, so it would have enough raise for when we put the strings in. But that was sorted, and then the next step was actually cutting the holes in the box to fit the neck. And I was using a tenon saw for most of this because it was a lot more of an effective tool going through it. And here's a couple more photos of me doing it. The issue we found is on this one, when we got to the lower side of the cut, it was a lot thicker, so we couldn't just use a knife to get it out. This is me cutting the top part of it, so a knife was more effective because there was less weight at the top, so you could easily get a knife through and take it apart. But at the bottom we didn't have that option, so we had to use a saw and make some cuts, and then just get a file and make sure it's flat. As you can see is what I'm doing here. I'm getting a file and making sure that the bottom parts are flat, so the neck is seated and not wobbling or wonky in any way. And here's Steve! Steve was coming to just check on my progress, I'm assuming. Yep, and I'm just explaining to him here about what I'm trying to do, because as you might be able to see, the edge of the box is not completely down, and that shows it's uneven still. And that is a major problem, as you do not want a guitar not flat. And then after that we decided to add the seating blocks in the guitar to keep it nice and flat, and this is the end part of the tailstock of the neck, which I was just sanding that down to be able to glue onto the end, so we have the right measurements at the back of the tailstock, and it'd be 2mm lower than the other one, so it would be flush with the box, so you get a better angle on the strings. I'm going to let Pass Me talk in a minute. I think he's got some words of wisdom to say. But I believe what I'm doing here is I'm making some offcuts, so there will be no marks on my neck when I am. I'm assuming gluing the fretboard in this video. What I'm just doing here is I'm making offcuts. I'm making they're called, like, it's basically bits of wood to take the pressure off the clamps for when we are doing the fretboard. So when this is turned over, these will be placed on here to absorb any of the excess pressure, so there will be no damage to the actual neck if the clamps get a bit too tight. Is probably the best way to put it. Yes, that's what I'm doing. Thank you, Past Charlie. Now, that is exactly right. You don't want too much pressure or marking on the neck because it can cause damage. Now, what I was doing here is I was putting 2 screws in and then cutting the top off with some pliers. So when I pushed the fretboard in, it would have some seating and it wouldn't just slide about, because that was a big part of that. And that was a big problem of putting the fretboard on. As you can see here, I'm gluing it up, making sure it's even, pressing down so you can hear those nails click in, and it's got more structure to it. And there are the offcuts I was cutting earlier, and past Charlie was explaining to you. And here I'm just clamping up. What I found was some of the big metal clamps were too big, so I ended up using some quick clamps, but they worked out perfectly fine. Now the next issue was we had to trim the side of the fretboard, and in the last clip there you saw the belt sander, and I just pushed it up to get most of the excess trimming done, and then the rest of it, as you can see in this video, I did by hand, so it was more of a clean finish, because you don't want to use a belt sander on something like that, because you would probably rip it or your fingers off, and it's just not effective. Now the last thing I had to do was I had to angle the top of the nut to make sure it was flush with the headstock. Unfortunately, I'm an idiot and I did not angle this video perfectly well. But what I'm doing here with that little angle saw is I am cutting it off, because there was so much excess stuff I couldn't actually, it would have just been a waste of my time just filing it all off. So I cut off the excess of that, and then I used a file to make sure it got flush and there was no excess glue or anything there. And that was that. Here's Martha. Thank you very much, Martha. Great photo. And that is it completely flush. Now the next, this is the next part of the video. The video is me drilling out the holes for the fret markers. So I always find it very useful to have fret markers on a guitar, because it is a very useful thing, because when you're playing and you don't really want to be thinking where's the 7th fret, you can just see it. So I always find this very useful. I'd never done I've never made fret markers before, and I didn't know really what to expect, but after watching the video and talking to a couple of the technicians, I realised how easy it is, because all you actually have to do is drill about a mil into the fretboard, and then you get these little white things, as you can see in my hand there, and you put them in, and then you just get a plier or a knife and you cut them off, leave them for 10 minutes so they're seated and they won't move once you're sanding it. But it was a very effective bit of a machinery. Now the thing is about the drills, these hand drills aren't always the best for these stuff. You could probably use a pillar drill, as you can see in the background, for more of an effective one, but I felt I had enough control, and we weren't drilling that far down, and as you can see here, I'm taking my time making sure I'm flat and I've got it seated, and it will go down straight and no wonky angles. So basically I did this for the rest of the time, but an issue that I did find with this is sometimes you would get some excess glue. Now that was tricky, but the way that I always got rid of excess glue in this entire build is we had spare paper towels, and you would go over to there and you get them and you just dab it off and clean it off until you can get enough glue out of the way. Because the one thing you don't want is excess glue on a fretboard and then causing bumps or just disrupting the finish of it. Unfortunately, yet again, I'm an idiot and I did not think about where I was and where the camera was. What am I doing here? I've got... yes. What I am doing here is I'm making sure that it is still flat and seated on the neck and the fretboard, because the issue with this, when you're drilling in, you can sometimes drill a bit too far and it can cause some up-ridging, and that is something that you do not want to happen. I'm going to let this video play out for a bit and I will come back to you in a couple of minutes. I'm going to interject here. What I'm doing is I'm drilling 2 holes because we are at the 12th fret, and at the 12th fret you always have it distinguished by having two marker dots there instead of just the ordinary one, and that is why I'm drilling 2 holes. Now, due to the size of my fretboard, it's only actually an 18 fret fretboard, so I only decided to go up to 15 because I did not find it necessary to have an 18th fret. Now, what I'm doing here is I am sanding down the tops of these little marker dots because it was so much more easy than getting a precise cut. And now I'm just doing the exact same process but on the side, so it's just easier. It's just about having more care here because it's a less wide bit of wood we're working with, so you've got to be more careful about where you drill and what you're doing. There's Andy coming to check up on me as always. Here is the next part of the build. I made the start of carving the neck out. So what I did is I got a file and I rounded the back, as we can see here, and I made some incisions at the front just to have a good idea of what I'm doing. And now what I'm doing is I'm taking a ply and I am just stripping the wood and getting a nice clean cut, and I'm taking away a lot of the excess wood. I find this is the best way to make a neck. It's more of a hand feel. It's less it makes it feel like it's less produced out of a factory, and this is the finished project of the neck. The next step was getting the frets in. Now this is a daunting task, as I was quite scared of this, because if you can easily bend / snap the neck in this part of the build. But what we were doing is we'd get the frets, we'd get them roughly in, you hammered them in, and you cut roughly from side to side to make it is less about doing as much filing as you could. Now the filing was quite a dangerous affair because you are using your hand, basically brushing against sharp knives effectively. It is very sharp, and I did cut my hand a couple of times, and it was a very, very tricky process because you had to be going even. You can't just like file perpendicular, because then you could end up cutting the wood or yourself and it wouldn't be even. So this is the best way to do it, and this is what was the finished product look like afterwards. Yet again, me not framing it perfectly well, but I will explain what's going on. What is going on in this video is me drilling the headstocks. Now the problem with the headstocks is they were 10mm holes, which are quite big, and you don't really want to be going in that one by one. So what I was doing here is I was drilling 5mm and 7.5 is why I'm changing the drill bit every now and then, is so I have a pilot hole so it's less likely to split the back of the wood, and that came effectively well. And I think there's a photo in a minute to show you that. If there is not, I'm very sorry. This is the next part. This is drilling the anchor points for the strings at the bottom. Now this was a quite tricky one because it was hard to find a drill bit that was the right fit, because it was needed to be 3.5, and a lot of the 3.5 ones weren't very long, so I was spending a lot of time trying to figure out how to get it long enough to go straight through, and it wasn't always effective. But I was just ending up I ended up just lengthening it so that the drill bit, as I think I'm about to do in a minute, the drill bit is long enough to go straight through the wood. And I'd purposely put it under a bit of the desk. As you can see, there's many holes in this desk, and I purposely put it underneath one of the holes so it wouldn't hit the bottom of the desk and cause any damage. Now this is quite an important part, because if this goes wrong and you put it too close to the edge, it can cause to split the neck, and it's just a lot of hard work down the drain, so you have to be very careful here. And as you can see, my head is completely over the drill, and the reason that I did this is because if you get a better idea of how straight it's going in and how effective the rest of it is. Now I've just hit the bite point there, and that is important because once you hit there you do not want to go back down anymore, or you are risking splitting or getting caught in a knot, or any number of things that could go horribly wrong and ruin all your progress for very little reason. Now this is very important because this is where I'm going to earth the strings as well, so there can't be any buzzing. So it's important to get a nice straight hole, because if you've got a wonky hole and you're trying to earth strings, you can sometimes lose where the actual hole is. And the issue with that is, if you just drill, when you're earthing strings, if you just drill in and you don't hit anything, you don't want to have two holes, because that completely weakens the structural integrity. And you've got to remember, you're having this as an anchor point for strings, and there's a whole lot of pressure going through this back point, and it's only about 6 centimeters long, very small bit of wood. So you need to make sure every hole you drill has to be precise, and because you don't get really any second chances on this part of it. And as you can see there, I'm using my finger as a ruler instead of an actual ruler, because my fingers are very straight apparently. But I'm just eyeballing it at the moment because it doesn't have to be perfectly straight. Now, I made a very silly mistake here. You've probably already spotted the very silly mistake. I am meant to have that the other way round. You want this seated on some plywood or some very light grainy wood, so it doesn't split. Stupidly, I did not think of that, and I just decided to drill straight through it, and we had quite a big issue with this. I think currently I'm drilling the tone and the volume holes, which came out fine because they were 5 and 5. They were both 5mm respectively, so it wasn't that big of a hole. But the jack socket was 7.5, which is quite considerably bigger. And I did not think of that, and what ended up happening was, when I went through with the 7.5, oh no, it was 10mm, sorry. When I went through with the 10mm, it ended up chipping around the jack socket, which was a massive pain, because then I had to halt all production of cutting out the rest of the hardware holes, and I had to just get some wood glue, clamp it, leave it overnight, and hopefully it will be fine, because unfortunately the jack is going to have quite a lot of pressure around it. These are all very pressurized areas where I'm drilling, so I can't afford to have any cuts or any chips. And also another reason I did it was, when you lay out the design, it would look very bizarre if it's just wonky. Oh god, I hate watching this. Flip the board over. Oh, anyway, that is the aftermath of it. I had to chip there and leave it overnight. Now, here's something where you don't need it to be seated. Because I was using a knife, I was cutting out the pickup hole, and I was using a knife, so it's a less aggressive tool than a drill. So I could be a lot more careful, just make some incisions, make some cuts, and it just goes straight through, and there was no splitting or anything else. But the next step of that was drilling out the sound holes. Now, I've been trying to do the sound holes with a hand drill. It didn't work very well, so I decided to use a pillar drill. What we have here is, we have me spreading some glue out evenly over the top and then laying the design over. The reason I'm using an ID card is because I want to get a nice even spread, because if it's not even, the bits will come unstuck, it could cause air bubbles. You want it to be nice and even and nice and flat, and I've got a bit of paper there pushing all the air bubbles out. This part wasn't very tricky whatsoever, it's just gluing. Here are the machine heads with the stockings in. Now, here was a massive issue. I really hated this. These drill parts would not go in correctly, and that was a massive issue. Here's me earthing the strings. I eventually did get the screws in, but it took a lot of hard work. What I'm doing here is I'm adding the bushings Now, here's an issue that I found with the bushings. The hole was too big for the bushings, so I ended up getting a tiny bit of glue, just getting them in there, clamping them there, leaving them for 10 minutes. They were nice and solid and seated, and they didn't catch on the earthing wire, which I just added in the last photo before, as you saw, and it was perfectly well. It went perfectly well in this part. Here was the wiring. I'd never done wiring before. It wasn't that complicated, and this was a great thing that my teacher Andy gave me. It's a wire connector, and basically what you did with that is it means it's easy to repair if anything goes wrong. So all I'd have to do is open the box, unclip the wire, and then I could take the neck out, and I could do because the earthing wire is keeping the neck and the rest of it connected. So that was a very useful tool that I had. What we have here is I'm testing the pickup to see if it's working with the wiring, and it is. I was very scared at this point, because if this had gone wrong, I've wasted 2 months of my life. Luckily for me, it went perfectly fine. I was in tomorrow, but what I really found with this, it was a great sense of joy and accomplishment that I was on the last legs of the project, and it was about to finish. Of course you can, Tom. Here is me and Niall just getting a feel for strings, of how they turn and twist. Both of us had never strung a guitar up like this. What I ended up doing is I ended up going home and getting my dad to help me, and this is what the finished product looks like after getting all the wiring done and everything. This is the finished product. I really appreciate you listening to me and having the time to watch this video, and I wish you a very nice day. Goodbye.